Hey everyone, Kirsten Heinisch here again. If you have ever experienced depression, anxiety, or any other emotional difficulty in your life, which many of us have at some point, you might want to understand why, the underlying reasons. And in this video today, I would like to introduce you to a psychological way of thinking which psychologists and other mental health professionals draw on to help make sense of our clients' emotional difficulties and struggles. And this way of thinking is very much a collaborative way of exploring and making meaning between client and therapist. And before we start, a very warm welcome to people who are new to my channel. My videos are about sharing my psychological understanding with you. So let's start. The psychological framework I'd like to share with you today is referred to as the 5 Ps, as in the letter P, the 5 Ps of psychological formulation. And these 5 P words are actually a bit of a mouthful, so I'll talk you through them one by one, and in the process I will connect them with an example from my clinical practice, which is obviously fully anonymized. When I meet a new client, I have these 5 Ps very much in my mind, as it helps me and the person I work with to make sense of and bring together the complex and multi-layered information and tapestry in a way that transpires in the first meetings. So here is the first P, which stands for presenting symptoms. The presenting symptoms are the struggles and difficulties that lead us to seek psychological help. So that's very simple, the presenting symptoms. Jane, my anonymous client, develops scary and unwanted thoughts about her baby being harmed and unsafe. For Jane, these distressing thoughts seem to come out of nowhere and caused her very high anxiety levels, low mood, which were also accompanied by quite awful panic attacks for Jane. So these were Jane's presenting symptoms. The second P stands for Precipitating Factors, or the Precipitating Event. This refers to a specific event that has triggered the emotional problem. This could be the birth of a baby, the end of a relationship, the loss of a family member. It could be work-related stress or any other difficult life experience. For Jane, the precipitating event was the birth of her baby girl Mara. Since Mara was born, Jane experienced being sort of internally bombarded by intrusive thoughts, such as, what if I drop Mara on the floor when walking down the stairs? Or what if she will be dead tomorrow when I wake up in the morning? Or what if I accidentally drowned her in the bathtub? And so on. Interestingly, these thoughts are actually not uncommon after the birth of a baby. But if someone gets very preoccupied with these thoughts, and these thoughts get sort of infused with worry and anxiety, they then can develop into a postnatal emotional problem. And this was the case for Jane. She'd been diagnosed with postnatal depression and anxiety. Very understandably, Jane felt hugely distressed and shameful about these thoughts. And this is why she sought psychological help. Now I'm coming to the third P, which stands for predisposing factors. Predisposing factors are those that put us at risk of developing psychological difficulties. And these factors are developmental, which means we experience things in our younger years during our emotional and psychological development, which make us more vulnerable or susceptible to develop emotional difficulties. It is that children are not yet equipped to really process traumatic experiences on their own. This means that children disconnect from their emotional pain and overwhelm in the service of adaptation in a way and emotional survival. However, these experiences have a way of coming back later in life and are often the underlying causes of our psychological struggles and vulnerabilities. So coming back to Jane, she grew up in a family where she was exposed to witnessing domestic violence between her parents. Her father had alcohol and drug issues and physically attacked her mother on a fairly regular basis. This was a terrifying experience for Jane as a little girl. She felt unsafe, worried, frightened when going to bed. She lived in constant anxiety about what might be happening between mum and dad once she had gone to bed. And when she was about 9 or 10 years old, she had to call the police to stop her father beating her mother on a number of occasions. And this was never talked about within the family. It was kept under cover. So all this happened a long time ago, and Jane had not thought about this since leaving home 25 years ago. In Jane's therapy sessions, these memories came back, and we were able to process the feelings associated with these memories. And now, as an adult, and with the help of therapy, Jane was, of course, able to feel, process, and release her feelings. We were also able to connect her scary and distressing and intrusive thoughts about her baby girl Mara being harmed and unsafe with her childhood experiences of feeling unsafe, scared, and unprotected. So basically we psychologically translated the unconscious and symbolic language of her presenting symptoms, which is the first P, which were highly anxious and intrusive thoughts about her baby being unsafe and harmed, into a psychological language of her memories, feelings, and her own experience as a young girl. And this psychological sense-making and meaning-making brought a considerable symptom relief to Jane. In the process of exploring and emotionally kind of digesting her traumatic childhood memories and experiences, her intrusive, scary thoughts pretty much stopped. So let's move to the fourth P, which stands for perpetuating factors. And perpetuating factors are those that maintain the emotional difficulty once it has become established. These perpetuating factors are our thinking, feeling, and behavioral patterns that are woven together into our belief systems and our mindset about ourselves, the world, and others in our relationships. And we call these patterns maladaptive patterns, which begin to form very early in our lives and get kind of consolidated and embedded throughout our lives, our teenage years, younger adult lives, and later. But in our earlier lives, these patterns are actually adaptive because they help us to function within the family that we grew up in. That's why they're adaptive in childhood. Yet later in life, they tend to not serve us anymore, and therefore they become what we call maladaptive or simply unhelpful, self-limiting and self-sabotaging. So Jane, for example, believed that the world is an unsafe and frightening place for her and her daughter. She felt that she was a helpless and powerless person, and she also believed that she can't trust anyone, including herself, with her feelings and her vulnerabilities. And this mindset reflected her experience as a young child, as a young schoolgirl. And even though Jane had grown into a very resourceful woman, her belief systems from childhood were still very active and maintained and perpetuated her depression and anxiety. And in the therapeutic process, we identified and psychologically worked with these aspects, which helped her to gradually grow out of her depression and her anxious, intrusive thinking patterns, which were kind of fueled by her underlying belief systems that I've just described. So let's move to the last and the fifth P, which stands for protective factors, which are our strengths, our resources that can mediate our difficulty and that can also fuel and support the psychotherapeutic process and the process of change, really, that is required to grow out of our psychological struggles and difficulties. For Jane, these protective factors were her commitment, her kind of inner motivation and desire to get better and learn about herself. She was determined not to pass on her own childhood experiences to her daughter. And another protective factor for Jane was that she was in a stable and supportive relationship with her husband. Other examples of protective factors could be a strong friendship group, it could be a professional satisfaction, it could be strong motivation to change and grow psychologically. So these are all very important protective factors that everyone brings to the psychological process, and when they are present, the outcome of the therapy is much more hopeful, really. So now we've come to the end of our exploration of the 5 P factors, which help us understand, make sense of the causes of our psychological difficulties. And just as a last thought that I want to leave with you, making sense of our emotional struggles, developing a psychological language, such as the 5 Ps allow us to do, is part of maturing and growing out of our psychological difficulties. So you may feel inspired to explore the 5 Ps in this way in relation to your own past or current emotional struggles. You may ask yourself, what are my current struggles? What triggered them this time? What has happened in my earlier life that has made me more vulnerable to develop these difficulties? And what is it about my mindset, my inner beliefs, that is possibly maintaining my struggles? And lastly, what inner qualities and resources in life do I have to overcome and grow out of my difficulties? And these questions are worth exploring in our own minds, maybe through journaling and writing things down, or talking it through with someone that you trust. This could be a friend, a partner, maybe a therapist. So I will leave it here for today, and I'm looking forward to meeting you again in my next video.